So, lymphatic system is probably the most forgotten about organ system that we have. If you're trying to name all the organ systems, this is the one people tend to forget about. It has the fewest parts. It has the least complicated functions. But where we're going to start with this is back at the capillary bed again. That's part of the reason I make such a big deal about capillary beds. And we're going to start with that concept that we had some fluid leaking out at the beginning of the capillary bed, and most of it came back into the bloodstream at the end, but not all of it. So we had overall loss of fluid out of the bloodstream in the capillary bed. Getting that fluid back is what the lymphatic system is for, generally. So we're starting at the capillary bed. So I already had you write this on another slide, but write it again here. That fluid that leaked out, not all of it gets pulled back in by osmotic pressure. The lymphatic system is needed to help get the rest of the fluid back into the bloodstream. So this bullet point, this is telling you what are the functions of the lymphatic system. They're just all in one sentence. It's humble. It's kind of simple, but it has 4 major jobs. Get fluid back into the blood. Sort of monitor the fluid for dangerous items that may be floating in it. That's what the second job is. And then we also, we'll talk about this part in the digestive system. It takes fats out of your gut when you eat them, and then it puts them in the bloodstream. That's kind of weird. That's different. So we'll talk about that part when we get to the digestive system, but you should go ahead and learn it that that's a general function of the lymphatic system. And the way that the vessels are structured helps it do the job. The way that the vessels are structured helps it pull the fluid, monitor it for particles, and then also transport lipids, because it has a particular structure of these lymphatic capillaries. So here's our capillary bed again. Here's our artery, arteriole, coming into the capillary bed, draining out into a venule. And all of those things that we talked about with the up arrow and the down arrow and osmotic pressure and hydrostatic pressure, that's all going on here. Same processes. But the fluid that leaks out and doesn't get recaptured is going to end up going into the lymphatic system. So from now on, when you see these green tubes, green stuff on the pictures, that's lymphatic system. And these are called lymphatic vessels. And veins and arteries tend to run along next to each other, so do lymphatic vessels. We just don't have you learn them in lab, but they're there. You have these lymphatic vessels. And to me, the coolest thing about lymphatic vessels is how fluid gets into them. I'm going to turn the light all the way off. So this is the end of a lymphatic vessel, and we call this blind-ended because this is a tube that has an end, like a closed-off end. It's not a continuous system like blood vessels. So when we say lymphatic vessels are blind-ended, they come to a stopping point, or they have a starting point.
All of them? Or only some of them?
All of them. All of them have a defined end, where that's the end of it. And let me show how that would look next to a capillary bed. So, see, the blood vessels appear to have no end, but the lymphatic vessels do. So this would be a blind end, the end.
Oh, like cactuses.
And the way that fluid gets in is through cracks again. So we talked about there are slits in capillaries. There are also slits or one-way valves in lymphatic vessels, and that's a little bit hard to see on here, but where you see these arrows going in, there are cells covering here, and they have little extensions that act like valves to only let fluid in. What makes the fluid go in? Just the pressure of it building up out here. Did you say osmotic pressure? It's actually hydrostatic pressure. But look back at the capillary bed. Oops, wrong way. Capillary beds are leaking fluid into the tissue fluid, and it's going to build up. And the pressure in the interstitial fluid is going to build up, and that pushes fluid into the lymphatic vessels. They don't even have to do anything. They don't have to spend energy to get fluid in there. Just by the drainage out of the capillary that builds up hydrostatic pressure, it goes into the lymphatic vessels. Very efficient. So they're kind of passively draining fluid out of the tissue fluid surrounding your cells. So that's where the fluid comes from. It is tissue fluid that has just gone into a lymphatic vessel. That's what lymph is. That's where it comes from. So once it's in there, I want to jump ahead a little bit first and look at the whole lymphatic system. So you see the green vessels, those are the big lymphatic vessels shown on here. And the blind-ended places would start where capillary beds are. The ends of lymphatic vessels are generally where capillary beds are. And lymph is always draining back toward the trunk. No matter where the lymph is in the body, it's going to be draining back toward the trunk. And as it moves back toward the trunk, it'll move through the vessels. It passes through lymph nodes, which are the blobs, and then eventually returns to the bloodstream up near the vena cava. So now let's go back here. So lymph gets into the vessels that are blind-ended basically by hydrostatic pressure. Drains in, and the fluid will move on its way toward the trunk, and it passes through these lymph nodes. Lots of people have heard of lymph nodes. That term is out there in the general public, lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are like stations where lymph is passing through, and this would be like when you go to the airport and you have to go through screening. Like there's people coming this way into the screening, there's people coming this way. It's a centralized location where the lymph can be monitored for harmful substances like bacteria, viruses, cancer cells. So guess who is hanging out in here? White blood cells, macrophages, T cells, immune cells are hanging out in here, and in essence monitoring what's passing through to see if it's dangerous. This explains why when you have an infection, your lymph nodes might swell up. Like, if you're in high school and there's an altercation in sophomore hall, people are going to run over there, you know, your one security guy, or maybe if it's big, your two security guys are going to run over there, start monitoring the situation, it will get crowded. So a swollen lymph node is crowded with white blood cells and probably harmful substances and debris. There's a situation there, and that's why it's swelling. So we've got white blood cells hanging out in here. There are lymphatic vessels coming in, that's called afferent. Coming in, afferent. This one is efferent, one vessel going out. So several coming in, one vessel going out. And we hope that whatever was dangerous coming in got stopped here before it went on toward the trunk. That's generally what lymph nodes are doing for you. There are also in the general public a concept of swollen glands, and there are probably some people that talk about lymph nodes and swollen glands and don't realize they are the same thing. So, say that you have an infection, you cut your arm, gets infected, lymph is draining back toward the trunk, it's going to pass through your armpit. Harmful substances will hopefully get caught in the lymph nodes in the armpit before the lymph drains down into the trunk. So you would have swelling at that place. What does that mean then if you've got swelling in these lymph nodes?
They're infections.
They're infected. They might be infected. They might be fighting infection. It could be from sinus. It could be from sore throat. But the problem is definitely above there, somewhere above. So swelling here, remember those are draining the head. What if you have swelling at that one? Where is the problem? It's probably in the leg. Probably in the leg. And then you have internal ones that you can't feel from the outside too. Lymph nodes are really not glands at all. They're something totally different. So if we've got fluid, draining from the extremities and sometimes coming up against gravity, and we know that lymph vessels run along parallel with veins and arteries, it's convenient that the same things that move fluid through a vein move fluid through lymphatic vessels too. You should add in here, it's the valves in the lymphatic vessels. The big ones have valves of their own. And when your muscles contract in your legs and arms, that's squeezing lymph through the lymphatic vessels. When you breathe and lower your diaphragm and lower the pressure in your chest cavity, that's also sucking lymph toward the torso as well. Same stuff that moves blood through veins moves lymph through lymphatic vessels. Which one's missing out of this that we had in veins?
Vasoconstriction.
That's kind of muscular bone. What do veins have that these don't?
The heart sucking.
That's still happening. That's respiratory bone. You don't have the big lumens. I mean, that's the boring one. That's the one that's easy to forget. But if you remember what moves fluid through veins, it's the same stuff for lymphatic vessels. They just don't have big lumens.
The sentinel or guard node is the first lymph node where breast cancer travels if...
Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me run this back. The other place that you probably have heard of lymph nodes is when people have breast cancer surgery and they say they took out a lymph node. This is going to talk about that situation.
The sentinel or guard node is the first lymph node where breast cancer travels if it is going to spread. To find this node, a doctor can inject either a special blue dye or a radioactive isotope or both into the breast prior to surgery. It moves from the breast tissue through the lymphatic vessels towards the armpit area known as the axilla. The first node to turn blue or have the highest radioactive count is considered the sentinel node. It is removed and immediately tested for the presence of cancer cells. If none are found, then the remaining lymph nodes are left intact. This reduces the risk of lymphedema in the future. However, if the sentinel node contains cancer cells, other nearby nodes need to be removed and tested for cancer.
That was quick. So I hadn't checked that link before. I'm glad it still works. So some of the terms that I'll get to that in a minute, once you write these. Talking about lymphatic drainage in the breast. I'm going to use this picture to talk about the video and then come back to that explanation. So when surgeons, they're trying to find the sentinel node, and then they take it out and then they analyze it, what are they really looking for in the lymph node in this situation? They're looking for, have cancer cells moved from the site of the tumor? Are they heading out toward the rest of the body? And where we look is in the lymph nodes. Because if cells are moving and they're going to move effectively around the body, they're going to get in the bloodstream. They don't go to the bloodstream first, they go to the lymphatic vessels first. So let's go back a couple slides here. Okay, so imagine that there's cancer growing here, and maybe one of the cancer cells breaks off, and it's now kind of in the tissue fluid. It can't get into the blood cell. Sorry, it can't get into the blood vessel, but it could squeeze into a lymphatic vessel, and once it's in the lymphatic vessel, it can eventually get back into the bloodstream. So lymph nodes can also have in them cancerous cells that are coming from an area that they drain. So when the video talked about the sentinel node, unfortunately I've seen this done now. I went with my friend. So they'll put dye where the tumor is, and then they see which lymph node it goes to, and that's the one that they're going to take out and biopsy and see, are there cancer cells in there? Do any of you had parents or grandmas that had this done? Yeah.
What's
One-
lymphoma?
Lymphoma?
It's a type of cancer, I know, but is it specifically like?
It might be lymph node cancer itself. I'm not sure. That's a good question. So when you take out a lymph node, the sentinel node, and analyze it for cancer, whatever that one was draining now is not so easy to drain. So the lymphatic vessels behind it, so to speak, how are they going to drain? And that situation can cause edema in the upstream tissues or in the tissues behind the lymph node. So let's say, let me go back to the big map. If for some reason I took out a lymph node here, where would the person swell up? Where would they swell?
Around
Around there. Like which direction?
yeah, top of shoulder.
Would it be down here or would it be up here?
Up there.
It should be down
I thought
here
it was
because
down
this
Yeah.
lymph node
Because it's going back, right?
ought to be processing fluid
Okay.
that's from distal, right? If we think about which direction is fluid going into the lymph node, leaving, it's the fluid coming in that would get backed up. So they would be swelling right here.
So in the wrist.
Distal. Distal arm. What about if you took out a lymph node there? Where would swelling happen? People pointing up,
Axle.
up, above there, before there, on the path of lymph, back down to the trunk. So when people have sentinel nodes taken out for breast cancer, they're usually in here somewhere. where are they gonna swell?
Didn't you say the axle? Axle.
These are axillary,
Yeah. Isn't that where you said they would swell up for breast cancer?
usually one of these.
Yeah.
Where would they swell?
What, in the breast?
Distal to there. So wherever that was draining. It depends on how many they have to take out. It depends on what they're connected to. So having swelling in your upper arm or this region after sentinel node biopsy is really common, and that's called lymphedema. So swelling, too much tissue fluid in general, that's edema. If it's related to lymphatic function, it's called lymphedema. And that's a really common thing that can happen in women that have had sentinel node biopsies, because now their lymphatic system has been kind of compromised and it's not draining tissue fluid well. It'll swell, it can hurt, it can cause their arm to feel stiff.
Where can the lymph nodes from here be draining from?
You would have to, it's hard to see on here, but they're draining up this way. So you think it would go this way, but it goes up into the armpit and then over. And we haven't talked about where it goes when it goes over yet. That'll be next. It is not. Okay, there's something really important. There's something so important that's not written on the slides. You've got to write it separately. And it's this. All lymphatic vessels eventually drain their fluid after it's been monitored, returned up into the trunk, into the superior vena cava. And that's kind of shown here. Lymphatic vessels draining over toward the superior, or it might be the subclavian vein. Might actually be the subclavian vein. One of those. That's where lymphatic fluid drains into. And so that is how, therefore, all of that fluid that was lost out of the capillaries, that's how it gets returned back to the blood. So it's okay if your capillaries don't pick up all the fluid that they lost. It eventually will get returned into the bloodstream right before it goes back into the heart. So you're not losing huge amounts of fluid out of your blood all the time. The lymphatic system puts it back. So that amount of information is what I'm covering for lymphatic system. What are the parts of it? What makes the lymphatic system? Lymph nodes, lymphatic vessels. The spleen is talked about alongside with it. It's not really part so much. It also connects with the tonsils. It also connects with some other little patchy areas near the digestive system. And we'll talk about those when we get to the digestive system. So there are a couple of extra slides here that they have organs that somehow relate to lymphatic system, they relate to immunity, or they relate to the circulatory system, but they don't quite fit anywhere. But they're worth talking about. The first one is the thymus. You think about your thymus a lot?
Yeah.
Do you? I think you're joking. Do you mix it up with the thyroid? That's some unfortunate naming. So thyroid, we've talked about that a lot in detail. Thyroid, thymus. And in people my age, the thymus is quite shrunk down. People your age, it's kind of shrunk down. It's fairly sizable in babies and little kids. So it's an organ that shrinks as you grow older. And what it's for is to help certain white blood cells form and mature for their job in the immune system. So T cells or T lymphocytes, which we'll talk about some next week, the T name comes from them maturing in the thymus. Those of you that had micro last fall, here's finally a picture of the thymus. So where is it? It's no man's land. Here, thymus. The second organ that we need to spend a little bit of time on is the spleen. Remember, I added spleen onto your lab guide, your lab structures list for this first exam, because it's really important for its role in filtering blood. So you have a fairly sizable artery, splenic artery, that goes into the spleen, and what the spleen is doing as the blood passes through it is it's taking out old, worn down red blood cells and helping recycle their contents. How do we get new ones made if the spleen is taking out the old? Where do the new ones come from? Bone marrow. Good. So bone marrow is making red blood cells. Spleen is processing damaged ones. Here's another fact. People that have sickle cell anemia tend to have ruptured spleens more often. Why? Cells get stuck in there. Even more than in normal capillaries, because if this is supposed to be taking care of messed up red blood cells, it can't keep up with sickled cells when people have sickle cell anemia. So ruptured spleen from big accumulation of sickled cells, that's very dangerous for them. Where's the spleen, Shemi? That's pretty good. Look for it next week on the model.
If you did have to take the spleen out, then someone had sickle cell, how would that, like,
If you have to take it out, you can take out the spleen. It's called splenectomy, and you can live that way. I don't know what you have to do in that case. It doesn't. It's survivable.
if you had sickle cell, it's still survivable?
I think so, but less survivable than if it were a. That's not the only reason to have a ruptured spleen. Good question. Okay, so we're gonna switch topics a little bit now and start talking about immunity. Those of you that, if you're going into exercise science, psychology, PE, this is all you're going to learn about immunity, which is unfortunate. It cannot be really addressed in a lecture in a quarter, but we'll learn a little bit about it. Those of you that were in nursing micro, you already know way more than this, and this is going to be boring. But that's okay. You should be group leaders or something. So what we're gonna think about first is all of the microbes that are out there in the air, on the surfaces of your desk, on your pencil, on your hair, on the doorknob, on your phone, on your shoe, on your tongue. There are a lot of them. And yet, on an average day, most of us stay healthy. Why'd you cough just then? That was ironic. Most of the time, we stay healthy, even though there are microbes everywhere. And that's partly because we have an immune system to protect us. The immune system is a body system. You cannot point to where it is. It's all over your body. So it's involving the blood. It's involving the lymphatic system. And indirectly, it's monitoring all body tissues. Remember when you studied skin and there were these cells that you learned about that crawl through the skin and they're looking for invaders? They had this like long stretched out shape. I've forgotten their name now. Your immune system touches all the parts of your body, but you can't point to an organ and say, oh, that's one of the immune system organs right there. Okay. But it's largely involving your white blood cells, and we'll talk about those more on Monday. But the parts that we're going to talk about today are certain barriers that your body has to microbes or harmful particles getting in you in the first place. So we can divide the immune system into two big branches. We call it innate and acquired. Innate is what we're starting with today. So here's a slide where you don't write any words. That means that this is so important that I want only listening, not writing. This is what innate immunity is like. You're born with it. You don't have to wait for it to start working. You're born with it. That's why it's called innate. You do not have to have been exposed to that threat, that bacteria, that virus. You don't have to have ever been exposed to it before. Your innate immune system will already start protecting you from it. So it's immediate. It's quick. It's ready all the time. So it's quick, you always have it, you don't have to have seen the threat before, but it's weak. That's the drawback. It'll protect you a little bit. There's no immunological memory. We'll talk about that, what that is later. And we also refer to it as the first and the second lines of defense in your body. So say that I'm Streptococcus pyogenes. That's the strep throat bacterium. If I'm going to infect you, I have to make it past your body's first line of defense, the second line of defense, and then there's a third line of defense. The innate immune system are the first and second lines of defense that you have against infections. This slide, I don't think you have a blank for that, but the first line of defense is just barriers. Barriers on the outside of your body, barriers at the entrance to your body. And that's what we'll talk about today. So what kind of things on or in your body are barriers to microbes or pathogens?
Membrane.
Membrane. What kind of membrane?
I just said membranes.
Membranes in general?
Yeah.
Skin. What else helps you keep microbes out? Mucus itself is a barrier. Mucus over top of the membrane is good. Hair in all the places, so eyelash hair, ear hair, nose hair, head hair. All of those are barriers. So if it's a structural barrier, we say that that's a mechanical barrier. It's not a chemical. Skin is one of the, as I sit here and pick my finger, skin is one of the best barriers to microbial infection if your skin is unbroken.
Oh, really?
If your skin is unbroken, unpicked, unscabbed, uncut, it needs to be continuous. So think back, whoever said you don't like epithelium, think back your depth of skin how many layers of cells there are. So stratified squamous epithelium, layers and layers and layers and layers. And a lot of those layers are keratin. Those dead cells, they've got keratin in them. You know, you can scratch, 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 it stays intact. You've got thickness, toughness of skin. That's a good barrier. Skin might seem a lot better barrier than mucous membranes, but they also are a barrier to microbes getting deeper if they're unbroken and continuous cells. And then another mechanical barrier is just flushing mechanisms. So think about all the places in your body that have an exit to the outside. And this is low. This word is ciliated, and down here is swim upstream, is the bottom word. So let's just focus on the head. Let's keep it mature. Focus on the head. What are all the entrances to your head?
Ears, nose, mouth,
eyes.
Ears, eyes, nose, mouth. Should be it. Should be it. Right? So what keeps microbes from going into your ear and getting deep into your head? Earwax is a barrier.
sure, hair. Some people have hairs on their ears. Older people.
Older people?
Yeah.
All ages of people have some ear hairs. That is a barrier from microbes blowing in. What about in your eye? What keeps microbes from going into your eye? What? Eyelashes. Tears going over the surface. Eyelids. A mucous membrane over the top of it. What about in your nose? Nose hair, snot,
Boogers.
mucus.
What?
So a lot of the entrances to your body, they have hairs and they have flushing mechanisms. So mucus being produced, or tears being produced, or earwax being produced, that is generally heading toward the exit. And that's keeping microbes from going deeper in. So if microbes are going to enter your body through the nose, they have to get past your nose hairs, they have to not get stuck in mucus. And those are barriers that helps you. Mucus is good. So those two, the first line of defense, those are the mechanical barriers and flushing mechanisms. If you later become a nurse or a teacher in a K-12 school, or any kind of worker where you don't go to the bathroom often, you tend to get UTIs, urinary tract infections, just because you're not flushing fluids out of your urethra. And it makes it easier for microbes to get in. We'll come back to that when we talk about urinary system. So you've got mechanical barriers, you've also got chemical barriers. So not just, fluids moving, but fluids having actual helpful chemicals in them that help you resist infection. Flip through these. So all of those bodily secretions that we think are yucky or inconvenient or gross, a lot of them actually have antimicrobial chemicals in them that fight against microbes.
Is this stuff going to be on your test?
It would be multiple choice type only. Yeah, not big conceptual questions. When I was in college, in our microbiology lab, we used some kind of media where we all spit into a tube and we put bacteria in it. we started with bacteria in it, we spit into the tube, we looked at how many of them died. And my saliva was just truly excellent at that. I remember being so proud. I have really good antimicrobial properties in my saliva. All of us do, I just have more of it than most people. Your skin itself, not only is it continuous, thick, keratinized, it also normally ought to be acidic. It's supposed to be acidic. That's protective. So not just continuous, but acidic to prevent microbial growth. Your stomach definitely is acidic, so any microbe that you ingest into your mouth, down the esophagus, into the stomach, a lot of them cannot survive the acid. And if they survive the acid, a lot of them cannot survive other digestive enzymes. You actually have to eat a lot of microbes to get a few to survive, to make you sick in that way, usually. The vagina also is supposed to be acidic. We come back and talk about that at the end of class. And then you also have cool chemicals in your blood called interferons that are virus fighters. And don't have time to talk about those much, but these are barriers. So this material we're talking about, what are the things in or on your body that prevent microbes from going deeper into the body? Are they mechanical barriers? Are they chemical barriers? And most places in the body have some aspect of both. We'll stop there for today. You can turn that off. What's your reading?